Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar about VAMP. My name is Jessica. I'm the Director of Marketing here at AltoPay, and I have just a couple things that we are going to talk about before we kick off the presentation. First of all, we are payment professionals, and everything that we're sharing here today has come directly from Visa, whether that's through publications or conversations we've had with them. But we just wanted to let you know that we do not represent or speak on behalf of the card brands. Also, all of the information that we're sharing here today is accurate and up to date as of now. But as we all know, with these policy updates, things can change pretty quickly. And we recommend that you try and stay on top of those updates if possible. There's a couple ways you can do that. We have a blog article where we're sharing all of the information that we have. We will share that with you in a follow-up email. We recommend that you check back to that regularly. We also encourage you to follow AltoPay on LinkedIn. We share a lot of updates there as well. I'd like to introduce our presenter today. Mark Standfield is an industry veteran. He has more than 20 years experience and is very knowledgeable in topics such as transaction processing, fraud, chargebacks, risk management. Before joining AltoPay as our CRO earlier this year, Mark was at recognizable companies including Ethica and Mitigator. I'd also like to introduce AltoPay. AltoPay is a payment solution provider. Some of the solutions we provide include merchant accounts, primarily for businesses wanting to grow in Europe, but also for businesses wanting to expand from Europe to US, as well as US to Europe. We also provide chargeback management solutions, including alerts and RDR. And our payment technology, among other things, includes intuitive data reports for metrics such as TC40 and chargeback rates. Our agenda this morning is going to start off with an overview of the current situation, what Visa is currently using to monitor fraud and chargebacks. Then we're going to go into an overview of the new program, including the regions that are impacted, ratios, thresholds, and fees that apply. We're going to talk about how this new policy could potentially impact your business and how you can prepare for it. And then lastly, we have a couple of questions that Visa hasn't clarified yet that we all just kind of need to be mindful of and keep an eye on as things progress. I encourage you to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Any questions that you submit, we're going to try and answer as many as possible during this live event. If there's anything that we don't have time to address, we will send those in a follow-up email after the event. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Jessica. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate everyone taking the time today to join us for the webinar. As Jessica mentioned, we're going to cover a lot of information, and the basic things we want to focus on today are really what VAMP is and how it's going to affect different merchants and acquirers throughout the regions that it is live in. But to start out, we wanted to cover a little bit about the current program so that you can kind of understand how we got to where we are today. So as you're aware, merchants have always had two programs that they've needed to measure their merchant account risk against. One is the dispute monitoring program, and the second is the fraud monitoring program. Acquirers have had one program, which has been called the Visa Acquiring Monitoring Program, or VAMP, and it has had two components to it currently, a dispute threshold and a fraud threshold. When you look at the merchant threshold, what you can see is there's two ways that merchants qualify to enter into a program. First is by dispute count, so the number of disputes that are processed, and then by the ratio, which is dispute to sales ratio. The fraud program is similar, except rather than using counts, it's using dollar amounts. And again, you still have a fraud ratio to be able to manage against that as well. This data is based on TC40 data, where the original dispute program is obviously based on disputes. For acquirers, again, they have similar programs that they need to measure their portfolios against, the dispute count that you can see there, as well as the dispute ratio, and the fraud threshold as well, is based on dollar amounts again and based on TC40 data. If an acquirer's portfolio does get over these thresholds, then oftentimes they have to submit some sort of remediation plan, much like merchants need to. and possibly even be subject to an audit by the brands to look at their portfolio and figure out what they can do to get back under ratios. So the all-new Visa Acquiring Monitoring Program has several components to it. First of all, Visa is retiring the dispute monitoring program and the fraud monitoring program, and they're consolidating that both the acquire and the dispute programs under the new VAMP ratio, with an emphasis being on the acquirer monitoring their risk. But that doesn't mean that the merchants don't have responsibilities as well, because they definitely do. The data that is used for the new VAMP ratios, you can see here, TC40, TC15 dispute data, TC40 fraud data. There's enumeration data, which we're going to touch lightly on enumeration. There's card not present settled transaction data, OI compelling evidence 3.0 deflections, CDRN alerts, and RDR cases. So a bit of information there, a little bit more than has been used in the past, but we know the data points, and therefore we can start to account for them. One of the questions that was asked earlier from a participant is, what is TC 40 data, TC15? Where does this data come from? How can I get access to it? And so TC stands for transaction code. And this is a daily settlement report that comes from Visa to the acquirers. And in that report, they have a few different types of transactions. They have sales, which are O5s, refunds are O6. 15s are sales that have been disputed, and then TC40s are sales that have been reported as fraud. A lot of people have also asked, what is enumeration and how is it going to potentially affect me? So enumeration is broken down into really two phases. The gist of it is that someone would submit a fraudulent card not present transaction to be able to see if they have valid payment information. And then once they validate that they have the right payment information, they typically will take that data and they will sell it, on the dark web or other places. One of the things to think about is there's two sides to enumeration. There's card testing, and card testing is where typically it's a low dollar amount that's being sent through your merchant account. So $1 or $2, or could be even less than that. And again, they're just trying to ping to see if they get a positive authorization from you. When you look at a brute force attack or an enumeration attack, that's when basically a fraudster is using sophisticated technology to send transactions through your card not present merchant account. But these transactions typically look like normal transactions like you would normally see. So they have the right dollar amounts. It's just the payment information may be a little bit off. So for example, they may have the wrong CVV. And so they'll do testing to see until they get the right CVV. And then they will pull that out and use that to be able to sell it again to other people. Now, the way that the enumeration ratio is calculated is it's the number of card not present enumerated authorization transactions approved and declined, divided by the number of card not present authorized transactions approved and declined for a given month. So if you were to receive an enumerated ratio for October, that would be based on September's data. The other side of the VAMP program and also enumeration goes live in April of 2025. This is going to include all the data that we talked about before, but it's specific to Visa transactions and it's specific to card not transactions only. When the announcement first came out about VAMP, it was listed just for Europe. And then in August of this year, that was updated to include all regions. In that update, it did not originally include Latin America. But we have validated through Visa and Verify that Latin America is part of this and that this is a global program that will launch in April of next year. So the way that you figure your VAMP ratio is you take the number of TC40 cases plus the non-fraud dispute reason codes, so 11, 12, and 13. You're going to subtract out RDR cases that were successfully resolved, plus CDRN alerts, and any CE 3.0 deflections that were also successful. That'll give you your top number, and then you're going to divide that by your settled card absent transactions or card not present transactions, again, for the given month. So October's VAMP report would reflect September's transactions for both of those pieces of data there. One of the things that you may want to think about and consider here is, do you have access to TC40 data? There's a couple of ways you can get that access, and we'll talk about that a little more a little later on in the presentation. You want to be able to make sure that you also have a good handle on the number of RDR, CDRN, and CE 3.0 deflections that you get, assuming that you're using those programs. We want to remember that Ethica alerts do not remove any of the VAMP cases, so they don't help your ratio go down. They do, of course, help with MasterCard chargebacks. So there is still a lot of relevant value there. Reconciliation, as you can tell, is going to be a bit of a challenge, right? And this is all going to be based on billing descriptor and by acquirer. So if you're a merchant that has 3 accounts at an acquirer, and let's say that they have similar descriptors, then technically those 3 could be rolled up into one VAMP ratio, and then you would need to manage those all together. If you have multiple accounts at an acquirer, but those accounts are for different products, they have different billing descriptors, then technically those should be treated separately and not rolled up into one VAMP ratio. So if we look at the VAMP ratios, the thresholds that we're trying to monitor or manage and stay under for the acquirer, they don't have an above standard starting out in April of 2025. They do have excessive, which is anything over 0.5 basis points. For merchants across all regions, except for Latin America, it's a 1.5% threshold. And again, for Latin America, it's 0.9. In January of 2026, they're going to add an above standard ratio for acquirers, which will be at 0.3 basis points. And of course, excessive stays the same. And then all other regions will drop to 0.9, except for CEMA, so Central European, Middle Eastern, Africa. They will remain at 1.5%. The enumeration ratio thresholds, they don't have a specific threshold for acquirers, but for merchants, it's basically 20% of the enumerated transactions over the total card not present sales, as we talked about earlier. And that's for both current, will be in April 25 and in 26. So one of the questions that we got asked also is enrollment still dependent on ratio and hitting a minimum case count? And the answer is technically yes, right? That there is a 1,000 minimum case count that applies to both acquirers and merchants. And that minimum is TC40 data and non-fraud dispute reason codes, as we talked about earlier. The only exception to that is CEMA for merchants only, and their minimum is 100 card not present, or sorry, 100 TC40 non-fraud dispute cases and a $75,000 USD volume to ratio that they need to monitor against as well. So we have a lot of people that are attending the webinar that are sort of in different positions. Some are with acquirers and ISOs, some are with merchants. So we wanted to cover just briefly the potential fees that are available or maybe assessed out there. First of all, for an acquirer, anytime they're over the excessive fee of 0.5 for 2025, they may receive a fee of $10, as low as $10 USD per case. Again, that's the TC40 and the non-fraud disputes. And in January of 26, they will have a $5 fee, which is above standard, which is a 0.3, and then it's still a $10 for an excessive above the 0.5. For merchants, they'll be as low as $10 for excessive, which is anything over 0.3, or sorry, 1.5%. In 25, and then dropping to 0.9 and 26 will be that. So this is, again, the fees that could be established. Now, the one thing that you want to remember is that these fees are all going to be assessed by the acquirer. So you want to make sure that you speak with your acquirer about how they're going to specifically run the program and how they're also going to enforce or charge these fees as they come through. One of the wrinkles in the program that we're still trying to get our arms around a bit is that if an acquirer's portfolio is above a specific threshold of 0.3, then enforcement fees actually apply to all merchants with the VAMP ratio over that 0.3 as well. So when you look again back at the ratios that we talked about, even though that the ratio for the merchant to enter the program is technically 1.5, what we know is that if they're over zero point 0.3 and the acquirer is over zero point 0.3, there's going to be fees attached. And so this more than likely will mean that acquirers will start to monitor merchants that are at or near that 0.3 ratio. One, because they're going to be having fees assessed to them. And two, because they want to know kind of the trends that are happening within their portfolio. The merchant may not technically enter the program, but because there will be fees attached, there may be costs already associated to the merchant as well as obviously to the acquirer. Again, check with your acquirer. They're the ones that are going to determine how and when those fees are assessed. And these fees are going to be on top of the chargeback fees that are currently being charged. So a couple of things to think about when you look at VAMP in general. The math, of course, has changed. It's a bit more complicated. And your VAMP ratio more than likely will be higher than what your chargeback ratio was before. Currently, around 50% of the TC40 cases do not become chargebacks. And so that's going to create this new metric that we all kind of need to manage to. When you think about the monitoring side of it, there's just more data that needs to be monitored. Some of these data feeds merchants haven't had easy access to before. So you want to make sure that you get that either through a solution provider like Alto, or there's other providers out there as well. Some of this data may be available from your acquirer as well. Again, more challenges, could be more mistakes, and reconciliation is going to be a bit of a challenge. So we have some case studies we wanted to share with you, and these are from real merchants that we took the data that they're seeing today, and we just said what would happen if it's now April 25 and now there's VAMP ratios that are coming into play. So this first merchant, they started out with 28,000 transactions in a month. They had 192 TC40 cases. They were not using RDR. They had 28 fraud cases and 68 non-fraud disputes. So when you look at their fraud ratio, today it'd be at 0.81. Their current chargeback ratio is 0.34. So they're both under the ratios that they need to be. When you look at VAMP, we're going to take the number of TC40 cases. We're going to add the non-fraud disputes. And then again, we'll subtract out any RDR, CDRN, and Order Insight, Compelling Evidence 3.0 deflections if they were using those programs. But in this case, they end up with 260 cases. And so when you divide that over the number of transactions they had for that given month, you can see that they're at 0.93 for that ratio. So they're fine for 2026, but they would be slightly over for 2025, even though they would not have the requisite 1,000 cases that they need to technically breach the VAMP ratio. So another merchant, a little bit of a smaller merchant, 923 transactions. When you look at their fraud ratio, again, taking the dollar amount of 1,140 divided by 26,757, that gives you a fraud ratio of 4.26%. So again, higher than what the current metric is that they should measure against. Their chargeback ratio of 12 to 923 is 1.3%. So again, also slightly higher. But you can tell that they're not close to the 100 chargebacks. So they're well under the ratio, the threshold that they would need in order to go into the chargeback monitoring program or dispute monitoring program. By the way, we use the terms dispute and chargeback interchangeably. Chargeback is how MasterCard refers to disputes. Visa is how disputes are how Visa refers to them. So there's the same thing, just used differently depending upon which card brand you're speaking about. When you look at the future VAMP ratio here for them, you can see that they had 34 TC40 cases. They had 9 non-fraud disputes and 1 RDR case. So that left them with a total of 42 cases. And so again, based on the number of sales, they would have a VAMP ratio of 4.55%. So in these, they have breached the ratio for the first two, but they did not breach the minimum. And the same for the VAMP ratio. The ratio they're over, but the minimum they're not. So this again will determine on how your acquirer is going to monitor this program, because technically If the acquirer is over 0.3, then they're going to get a fee charged to them for each one of those TC40 and non-fraud dispute cases. But the merchant wouldn't technically be eligible for the program because they're not close to the 1,000 minimum. So another merchant here had about 100,000 transactions in a month. Their fraud ratio was 2.7%. Their chargeback ratio was 0.67%. So they're doing pretty well on both, although slightly over on the fraud side right now. And then when you look at their VAMP ratio, so we took 22,710 TC40 cases, subtracted out the 441 non-fraud disputes and the 1,325 RDR cases, which left them with 1,826 cases, and dividing that into the 100,000 transactions they had for that month, that's card not present transactions, it gave them a VAMP ratio of 1.82%. So in this case, they would be both over the ratio and over the minimum because they're over that 1,000. And so they would be eligible to go into a program. The first time someone enters into the VAMP program, there's a 3-month grace period where no fees are attached. And then once they get their ratios underneath the threshold, then they come out of the program. If they go back into the program later that year and the next year, it's a 12-month rolling. There is no grace period after that. They just enter directly into the program and the fees start to be assessed right away. So for acquirers, this is going to bring about some challenges, maybe similar to the ones that we saw with RDR, where there's new reporting, new data that's coming back and forth between the brand and the acquirer themselves. They're going to need to figure out this new fee structure and how they're going to bill for that. And they may want to consider partnering with a solution provider to help them with the VAMP ratio and reporting and monitoring. For merchants, you want to review your current ratios, make sure you know where you are and also where you're trending towards your VAMP ratios. Again, talk to your ISO or processor on how their acquirer is going to be managing the program so that you're aware and you can be diligent in monitoring the right thresholds. Sign up for CDRN, RDR, or Order Insight Compelling Evidence 3.0 if those are right for your business. And then find out the best way to get access to TC40 data. So let's look at how this fits together in kind of some real world examples. We're going to talk about sort of the life cycle of a transaction, including what happens when a dispute is raised. And there's some key things that merchants need to be doing at specific times so that they can have the right data that they need to be able to respond if a dispute gets raised later. Either in trying to deflect the dispute or maybe even trying to win it. But starting out is really where we find our offense. And the offense is when the order is originally created. That's when you want to make sure that you're capturing the right information up front. So again, all the order data you're going to have of what they purchased, you're going to want the customer information, or at least as much of that as you can get. IP address, device ID, username if it's a digital product. And what that does is that's setting you up with some basic core data that you'll need. You'll see in just a second if you're using one of the programs to help reduce your VAMP ratios. The second stage typically could be where you pass the transaction through some fraud tools of a third-party vendor. The fraud tools here can help you in multiple ways. One, they can really help with enumeration attacks through different velocity controls. And there's other ways that they're taking noise out of the system so that you're not letting bad actors in the front door right off the bat and then causing your ratios to spike. Once the order is fulfilled, you want to make sure that you're gathering the delivery confirmation if it's a physical good, again, or their username and site access of how they're accessing the digital content that you're delivering to them. So at that point, the offensive portion has been completed. You've gathered all the data that you need, and now a dispute gets raised. So when a dispute gets raised, this is when informed data is first available, the TC40 data that we talked about. You may be able to get that data from your acquirer, but again, it's also available through the verified product Inform, and it would start to become available right then. The next stage that would happen is if you participate in Order Insight and or Order Insight Compelling Evidence 3.0, you may receive a request for information from an issuer that says, this transaction has been brought into question. Give us the information back from it that you have available. And that data that you can see there, you're going to now send to them, or is this order information, customer information, IP address, device ID, username. So it'd be something like, this was Princess Pack 4 that was purchased by an iPhone 15 out of Utah at 3 o'clock on the afternoon of Friday. And this is the fifth purchase that's been made of that particular product. That would give someone the ability to look at that and say, oh, okay, that was my daughter or son, or maybe it was them who did it. But anyway, it would hopefully give them the chance to say, you know what, I know what that is. I don't need to continue with the dispute. So there's no refund that's being processed here. This is only that's data that's being exchanged. And that's one of the benefits of the Order Insight program, is that you're not having to do a refund. And so the best world is that, the dispute gets withdrawn. And again, there's no damage done to your account. If Order Insight isn't successful, or if you're not using it, then the next step would be to receive a CDRN alert or possibly an Ethica alert. If the CDRN alert is successfully resolved, then that is going to take off the VAMP ratio, as we talked about earlier, and it's going to stop the dispute from being further processed. Of course, this is where you're proactively refunding the transactions so that you're able to make sure that you're successfully resolving them. If you were to receive a CDRN alert and then not successfully refund it or resolve it during the time frame, then it would not take off the VAMP ratio. And it would still count against that that's coming up. If issuers are not participating in CDRN, then there's a step for RDR now. Rapid dispute resolution is available to be able to stop the chargeback. This, of course, is where the acquirer will be returning the money to the issuer, and the merchant doesn't need to initiate that refund. All the merchant will need to do is to set up reconciliation so that they can make sure that they're properly notating the RDR cases that have come through in their billing system, and hopefully not billing those people again in the future, which potentially could create another RDR case that they have to look at. So if for some reason that doesn't stop it as well, then now is when a dispute is received. And this is when the second portion of informed data is available, which is dispute initiated. And this is when the TC15 technically gets filed, so that you're going to receive this notice. You receive them now, notice as a dispute notice or a chargeback advice. But again, you can receive that data either from your acquirer or through Inform, or both even, depending upon the speed of one over the other, that may be beneficial for you. If you decide at that point, you can accept the dispute, and of course, the case will be closed. It would count against your ratio, your VAMP ratio, and if there was a TC40 attached to it, it would also count there as well. If you decide that you're going to respond, or you're going to try to recover revenue from the dispute, one of the reasons you may want to do that is if you had previously refunded the transaction prior to the dispute date. That would be a case where you should be able to win almost 100% of those. And then again, you're getting some benefit there because the revenue is coming back to you. You wouldn't have double paid the issuer, and so therefore you can get that back. So we wanted to just quickly have you guys take a quick poll for us, if you don't mind. And just a one question poll. We just wanted to know if you're currently using prevention solutions. If not, if you're interested in hearing about those, we'd be happy to tell you about them or answer any questions that you have as well as we go through the program for sure. Appreciate everyone participating in that for us. That's very helpful. Okay, we're going to hop into some questions here in just a second. So a few outstanding questions that we still don't know yet because the data has not been made available is when does the acquirer have to terminate a merchant? So in the current fraud programs and dispute programs, typically, as the months go on, when someone's in a program, the fees escalate, and it gets to a point to where the acquirer decides that they may need to shut that merchant account down. We haven't been given any guidance around when that will happen or need to happen with VAMP. We know it'll still be up to the acquirers, but generally there are some guidelines of how fees may escalate as someone stays in the program longer. We just haven't seen that information yet. How do enumeration attacks factor into monitoring? That's another one. There is a enumeration minimum that needs to be hit, which is 300,000 enumeration transactions. That seems like a lot, and not sure if many merchants would hit that. Some probably would, but how is that factored in? That's something also that we're still waiting to understand. And then the part that we talked about earlier, if a merchant is technically under 1.5%, but the acquirers are fined for merchants that are over 0.3%, assuming the acquirer is over 0.3%, then which ratio will acquirers use as a threshold to monitor their merchants? And again, it makes sense that they would start to monitor around that 0.3 rate, but what's going to happen for that? Is that just going to be for fees? Or are they going to start to send notifications over saying, your account is higher than it should be, and we need to take some remediative action? It's very possible, but that will be up to each acquirer, which is why you do need to make sure that you speak with them about the programs. Okay. I have a QR code there for you if you'd like to learn a little bit more about Alto and the chargeback prevention solutions that we provide. My contact information there I wanted to share. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to try to help you navigate those as best as we can. Of course, as Jessica mentioned, as more data becomes available, we are going to be updating our blog article. We've already updated that once with the new update that came out in August, and we'll continue to do that so that you can always have the latest information available to you right there. Okay, with that, we can turn it back over. Jessica, if you have questions that have been chatted in, we can start to cover some of those.
Perfect. I got quite a few, so let's see how many we can get through. Is the 1,000 monthly minimum on the descriptor level?
It is on the descriptor level, but it's by descriptor by acquirer. So again, if you have 3 merchant accounts that have a similar descriptor, those may all be rolled up into one to be viewed as one descriptor, and therefore the 1,000 would count for all 3 of those. If they're different descriptors, then they may not be rolled up, and technically it seems like they shouldn't be rolled up. But again, you have to talk to your acquirer to determine how they're going to monitor that and manage it.
All right, next, how do you see the impact of Order Insight and CE 3.0? As it comes before RDR and the dispute flow, is it likely to have a similar impact on the market as RDR had, and potentially become Verify's main product for replacing RDR as a remediation tool?
Great question. So one of the challenges with Order Insight has been that you're basically asking issuers and you're asking their customer service agents to confront their cardholder about a transaction. So cardholder maybe reaches out, or the issuer reaches out to them, and the cardholder says, no, it wasn't me. And then the issuer says, okay, but I've got all this information that says it probably was you, right? And now what has to happen is the cardholder needs to either recognize that information and say, okay, you're right, it was me, or they're going to say, I don't know where you got that data, but that still wasn't me, and therefore I want to proceed with the dispute. It's difficult for issuers, just like it would be for any business, to kind of call out their customers and saying, well, we think you're lying, right? And so because of that, Order Insight has been not as effective as maybe we would all like for it to be, but it still does have merit, and it still does have some benefits for it, for using it. Again, the biggest benefit is that you're just giving data that really the customer should already have, and you're not having to file a refund right off the bat. Do I think it will replace RDR? I don't think it will, just because of that friction that occurs at the issuer level. Something would need to change in that process. Now, with compelling evidence 3.0, if you have the right data that's available where you can show two previous transactions that were not charged back for fraud, that were between 120 and 365 days older than the case you're dealing with right now, then you can block the issuer from actually filing. Visa will block the issuer from filing the dispute, and they'll also make sure that that TC40 doesn't get put on your case. So if there was enough data there available, then this very could well overtake some of the benefits of RDR. But for most of the merchants that we talk to, most of their chargebacks occur around month 1 or month 2. Sometimes they occur where it's been months of them billing someone or somebody ordering products from them, and then they try to charge them all back. But in general, they occur so early that the Order Insight 3.0 today isn't applicable, because they don't have the corresponding data to be able to send back and have that liability shift occur from Visa.
All right. Next, can a TC40 occur when a Visa sales transaction was authenticated with 3D Secure?
Yes, it can and does.
Okay. Okay, this is kind of a longer one. Let me see if I can reword it a little bit. So we know CE 3.0, if that successfully deflects, if that's successful, it will remove the TC40 from the merchant's count. Does Order Insight without CE 3.0 also result in a deflection of the TC40, or does the TC40 occur regardless?
Yeah, without the CE 3.0 deflection, the TC40 would occur, and it would not be deflected just based on the Order Insight data being passed back through.
Okay. Do you think acquirers' risk appetite will decrease?
It's a very good question, one that we've been asked. You would think that there would be some sort of change, just because they're now having to monitor and manage this new level that comes through. But many of these acquirers, they built their business largely on card not present businesses. That's how they make the majority of their income. And so we believe that they will find a way to manage through this, and to be able to hopefully maintain close to their current risk tolerance as possible. In some cases, it may be that the risk tolerance actually becomes better, because you have merchants that can manage the VAMP ratio with all these tools that are being presented. So we'll have to see. It's going to be based on each acquirer and how they interpret it. So I would definitely make sure that you talk with your acquirer and find out how they're feeling about it and what they're thinking is going to happen.
All right. We can only deduct RDR related with TC40 transactions. Is that statement true? We can only deduct RDR related with TC40s.
So RDRs do cancel out the TC40s, but they also would cancel out the disputes as well. So therefore, it does count for both. But I think the way they're asking the question, it is right that if a TC40 doesn't occur and an RDR occurs and it's RDR eligible, then again, that wouldn't go against your VAMP ratio because it's being taken out. So I think the answer is that it is true, but there is an extra component to it, because it would also take out the dispute cases.
Okay. Would you say that CDRN is going to be effective, or if we only have RDR, would we be fine?
Good question. I know there's some changes that are coming to the CDRN program. There's issuers that have been signing up for that. RDR was mandated across all issuers globally by Visa, which is why it has such great coverage and why the product is so effective. We'd have to see. We'd have to see if CDRN is going to be that beneficial for every merchant. For some merchants, it may help them. For others, it may not. So I would say that's probably on a case-by-case basis.
All right, how can I prevent a possible fraud attack on my MID?
So there's a lot of fraud that's out there. One of the things that Order Insight was initially designed to combat was friendly fraud, right? So for first party fraud, family fraud, the husband did it, the wife didn't know, the kid did it, they didn't remember. All those things where it wasn't the card was compromised and someone tried to buy the product. It was a problem or a misunderstanding within the billing cycle or the billing of the product itself. When you look at how to block true fraud, those third-party fraud vendors that are out there, they have a bunch of different tools that can be used to help with that, and those also specifically help with enumeration attacks. And so I would recommend that if you don't have a fraud solution in place, that you look at that with some of the more well-known vendors out there. If you do have one already in place, then I would review it both with your internal team and with the vendor, just to make sure that you're taking full advantage. It's difficult because you don't want to block good sales, and I know that's always the argument of why people kind of shy away from fraud tools, as they're afraid that they're blocking good sales. I think with the new VAMP ratio, you're going to want to have all the tools available to you, especially at first. And then maybe once you see how the ratios are coming through, you can, loosen up certain areas to make sure that you're still maximizing your revenue as well.
Okay, who do you think will be most impacted by the new VAMP ratios?
Well, certainly, it's designed against card not present or for card not present merchants. So I believe that the merchants that probably have, you know, higher cases of friendly fraud, that they will probably be the ones that will be impacted the most, just because there's going to be additional scrutiny that's going to be put on here. And so what we don't know also is how issuers are going to change behaviors, or if they'll change behaviors in relation to TC40, filing those, and in relation to chargebacks as well. So that's another unknown component that we're not sure about. But in general, I would say card not present merchants are the ones, especially if you're in a medium to higher risk segment, that you should make sure that you're really on top of those ratios.
Okay, is it possible for all TC40s to be included in as RDR transactions?
We've heard that being kind of pushed out into the marketplace, but in talks with Verify and Visa, that is not how the program has been designed. And as far as we're aware, there isn't a path forward on that today. That could change down the road, but today that's not part of their program and not something that we understand that they're entertaining.
Okay, sorry, I got questions coming everywhere.
Okay.
Does the card present transaction count in the ratio in the sales count?
It does not. It's only card not present transactions that count.
What happens in the case of a double refund where the customer is first refunded and then initiates a chargeback? If we fight and win these chargebacks, will they also positively impact VAMP?
So they won't affect your VAMP ratio. They would affect your bottom line, because you would get that revenue back. And that's when someone gets paid twice, that's called dual enrichment. And so that is against the brand's regulations. So you should win 100% of those. In theory, if you refund it before the chargeback is filed, that should be caught so that the chargeback doesn't progress. But we know that that definitely happens. But again, it doesn't impact your VAMP ratio. It would just bring you that revenue back, so you're not out the money twice.
Okay. Do we no longer need to worry about fraud to sales ratio, as it's entirely transaction count based?
Well, you do need to worry about it until April of 25 at least, right? And then it will change to count based. except for SEMA, as we talked about in that one file, they have they still have a fraud to sales amount that's being managed. So anybody that's in that region will still need to do that, but all the other regions, it'll just be the VAMP ratio is what we're focused on.
And I guess this should go without saying, but this is for Visa. You'll still have to worry about fraud ratios for MasterCard. Yeah.
Correct. Good point.
Yeah. Okay. A lot of what I found online is saying that this only applies to European merchants. Is that true?
That was true at first, but then there was an update that occurred towards the end of August, sometime around the 20th of August, I believe, of this year, that opened it up to all regions. So it is global, it is for all regions, and they're all going to launch simultaneously in April of 25. At least that's the plan today. It could change, but today that's what's happening.
All right. I don't currently utilize RDR because I don't want to refund every dispute. I win most of the disputes that come in. Will there be a way to implement rules for RDR to only refund transactions that will contribute to the VAMP ratio?
So today there is a rules-based system that you can put in when you enroll for RDR so that you can say, for example, I don't want to automatically resolve transactions that were 200 euros or more, or $200 or more, whatever that dollar ratio is that you want to put in there. And the reason behind that is so that you would still get the dispute, and then you'd be able to fight it and challenge it. There's about 7 different, if I remember correctly, 7 different rules that you can use, and you can use these rules in combination with one another to create a lot of different paths in there. So I would like to take that back and research that a little bit more, but my understanding is that yes, there is a way that we could put some rules into play so that you would not have to refund all of them through RDR, that you could still have some that would come through. For example, you could say if it's a fraud-based reason code, then I want to potentially not refund it, and I'm going to challenge those. That would be one way to accomplish that.
Okay. My chargeback fees with the acquirer are cheaper than what RDR costs, so I've never activated it. Will this force me to turn it on now?
All depends on your ratio. So you could see the first case study that we did, or maybe it's the second one, the merchant did not have RDR on that they were using, and they were staying below thresholds. At least they were staying below thresholds for 25. They would still be above in 26 because I think they were at 0.93, but based on your ratio, that will be what you want to determine if you want to turn it on or not.
All right. We are currently receiving some Visa disputes alerts via Ethica. Will these be included in RDR in the future, and how should they be accounted for?
Good question. So because RDR was mandated by Visa for all Visa issuers globally, that data should be covered already in RDR coming through. However, if you're processing the ethical alert up front, it's probably taking it out of that path so that it's not following all the way through. So the only thing that you would want to monitor is, are you still getting TC40 alerts on those Ethica resolved Visa transactions? If the answer is yes, then they're not going to help your VAMP ratio. If the answer is no, then they did help your ratio kind of inadvertently, and so you don't need to worry about any overlap there.
If I use RDR to refund everything, would my VAMP ratio be 0%?
Well, it wouldn't be 0 because about 50% of all TC40 transactions do not become a dispute. Therefore, they do not become an RDR. And so you would still have some ratio that would be factored in, although it more than likely would be greatly reduced from the use of RDR.
Okay, it seems like the whole VAMP update is a ploy for Visa to get merchants to use their products. What are your thoughts on that?
heard that before, and I can see how someone might say that. Part of the reason that we started out the webinar with reminding everyone about the programs that we're currently under is because there's always been something that we've been managed to, both as acquirers and as merchants. And in the past, the ways to, reduce chargeback thresholds have been outside of the network, right? Same thing for fraud ratios. It's been based on doing things outside of the network, not inside the network. So in this case, with this new ratio, because they're bringing tools and they're saying these are the ways that you can manage your account successfully, and it's within the program, it just gives a much higher chance of success. And so while it certainly is self-serving, it's also beneficial to the merchants and acquirers, because now they know how to manage the programs and the tools that they can use to reduce those ratios.
All right. How do you know if the acquirer has refunded via RDR?
So there is a report that comes out of Verify today. It's a daily report that has all of your RDR cases in it. That is how you can, best determine that you did have a case. You can also look at your chargeback or dispute report, and any cases that you see that have an M next to the reason code. So if it's M10.4, the M is what designates it as an RDR transaction. What you want to make sure, though, is that you're comparing that against the Visa or the verified numbers, because you may have thresholds, or like we talked about earlier, you can put in rules to be able to limit the number of RDRs that are processed. So even though it came through as an RDR, if it wasn't successfully resolved, then it would still count against your VAMP ratio.
Right. How long does it take to integrate with CDRN and RDR on average?
So the integration really depends on the system that you're integrating to, but we've had people integrate to our system as fast as a day, and sometimes it can take them, a couple of weeks based on resources that they have available. With RDR, you technically don't have to integrate to use the product, because the refund's being done by the acquirer. You just have to get that daily settlement report. It does take a little longer to enroll in RDR, and that's just due to some of the complexities of validating that the right metrics are being used to enroll. But in general, I think that if someone's signing up for those programs, they should be live and working with CDRN. Could be as fast as a day, and with RDR, it may take 2 to 3 weeks for the enrollment process to occur, and during that time, they could complete the integration if needed to use that product as well.
Okay. You mentioned at the beginning that AltoPay offers these solutions, the alerts and RDR, but I don't have an AltoPay merchant account. Can I still use you for alerts and RDR?
Sure, you bet. Yeah, that's not a prerequisite at all to use our products.
Okay. And the last question that came in is, will we receive a copy of the presentation? And yes, we will. We'll send this out after the event, along with the recording. You can watch it back anytime. And we'll also include, we're going to write out answers to a lot of these questions and include that in the email, as well as a link to our blog article. There are a couple other questions that came in. They're a little bit more detailed, so I'm actually going to save those for the follow-up email, just because I think those are going to be a lot easier to answer in writing with examples. So I will be sure that we answer those. I haven't forgotten you. There's just a couple minutes left. I haven't seen anything else come in. If you guys have any last minute questions, go ahead and drop those in. Otherwise, I think we can call it a day.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. We appreciate you taking the time today to spend with us. We hope it was informative.